Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Achievers Journey podcast. This is the first time that we are meeting, so introductions are in order. I'll introduce myself first. This is Pulkit Arora. I'm an engineer and MBA by training, 16 plus years of experience in supply chain through and through with Procter& Gamble, and I'm the host of this podcast. What's more important is this podcast, of course. It's called The Achievers Journey. The objective of the podcast is basically to get achievers from multiple walks of life and sit down with them and have deep conversations on their journey to success. The intent is to pick on their experiences, the behaviors, the habits, the hard skills, the soft skills that they have developed over a period of time, so you can also use them on your own journey to success, whichever way you have defined success. Before we proceed with today's discussion, I would request that you go ahead and click on subscribe down below on YouTube so you don't miss out on future content, very similar discussions that we have in the upcoming sessions. Today is the first episode of this podcast, and as life would have it, I'm having it with the same person with whom I started my professional journey 16 plus years ago. Sachin Mirashi is the Senior Vice President for Supply Chain with Procter & Gamble. He leads the Asia Pacific Middle East Africa region. Sachin has been with P&G for close to 25 years. Amazing supply chain leader, visionary, and I think it's safe to say is an exceptional people manager. Sachin, welcome to the Achievers Journey podcast. Great to have you. Really an honor to host you here as the first episode of this podcast.
No, thank you. And it's my equally honor and pleasure to be here with you, and all the best on your adventure as you start your journeys on podcast. And I'm super happy to be doing it with a person who I had hired in the company, now close to 16 plus years back. And I'm so happy to see your personal growth and professional growth through this period as well.
Talking of growth, Sachin, so you are the first homegrown talent that the region has got to lead supply chain for Asia, Middle East, Africa. How does it feel?
Yeah, I think, obviously, I don't think I deserve all those kind words and the introduction you had, but I can say that life has been a learning journey, and I'm super thrilled to come back home and lead the supply chain of 105 countries for Procter& Gamble. And it was always a dream coming true for me. As I had shared with you in past, when you start the journey as a new hire, as a band one leader in a small organization, and then over the years of 26 years of experience, you gain different skill sets across the world, and you can come back home and be the chief supply officer of the region. I can't expect anything more than that, but I would say that I have been lucky to be at right place at the right time, and I always say that you need sun, moon and stars to be together for this. So I'm super excited. This is where I started my career, and this is where I hopefully can leave a legacy behind in that role.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm sure you're being very humble when you say that sun, moons, and stars have to align, and that's true as well. Of course, you need to be at the right place, right time, as we call it. But beyond that, Sachin, again, I think people would not even probably aspire to be where you are when people join right out of campus. I think our aspirations typically are the leaders we see around in whichever teams we are, and then once you reach there, you're like, okay, my God, we can, I can probably go higher from here. But what do you think has kind of worked for you?
Yes, I think the first and foremost is you need to be in the right job and the right company. I'll tell you, supply chain has been my passion. And, after doing my mechanical engineering degree, I did master's in supply chain management from one of the leading business schools in India, as you know, SPJN. And I always wanted a job and a career which will help me move across all facets of supply chain. And I think P&G product supply option gave me that opportunity. So one is, I could join a company of my dreams working for Procter, and that too in supply chain, being the Gartner master, and, all the case studies we used to learn in our business school about P&G, Walmart and all, featured P&G as one of the leading supply chains in the world. So I think the first definite point I would say is being able to work for a dream company. And that was the company I got out of my business school campus. So, I would say that was the first thing done right. But then the two things which have propelled me through my career, one is, being blessed with working with right mentors through the career. the right leaders as well who have inspired me to do my best and possibly beyond. Because it also starts with a dream, right? And when I started P&G in India many years back, like 25 plus, I never dreamed of being a chief supply officer of the region, right? I always thought, my best job would be to lead the country where I started. And in 8 years, I got there. And then the question was, what's next, right? Career is 35 plus years journey. And then I kept moving. So one is really to see that dream of what's possible. And many times you could possibly end up achieving more than what you dream, especially if you stay at it longer, right? So I think that would be the second important thing. And then the third simple aspect of P&G is it has been a lifelong learning journey. And what I realized, 10 to 12 years in career is you need to sharpen the saw and you need to upskill yourself to stay in the game and make sure that you enable others to achieve their aspirations. And for my later part of the career was also about organization building and growing others. And possibly because I was able to grow my people to their aspirations, it has been a personally rewarding journey for me, and it helped me also propel me to where I wanted to be. So I think those will be broadly the three areas, other than, the sincerity, hard work, and obviously a bit of luck as we talked to get to where I always dreamed to go there.
Right. You talked about mentors, Sachin. So is there one or two advice that you have received from people? I'm sure, with mentors, of course, you work over a long period of time, but has there been some game-changing advice that you have got from people which you kind of stayed with you for long and has been a factor in?
It's a very good question, Pulkit. And I can tell you, I owe a lot of my success to possibly 3 or 4 mentors who have shaped my career. And some of these have been professional mentors. Some have been even even my grandfather. But I'll tell you the 5 pieces of advice which I always got, and they have stayed with me through these 26 plus years. One is, if you dream big, you get big. And I think that's the first most important advice I got, because normally we define success incrementally versus really looking for a moonshot or a beacon. And for me, that dream was given by one of my mentors, which is to really dream big, because then you know where to go and then you push yourself to get there. That would be first. The second good advice I always cherish is progress happens when you only go out of your comfort zone. And a lot of times, young leaders want to play within what they are comfortable with. They are not willing to take necessarily international experience. They don't want to get into assignments which take them out of their normal skill set. And I think that would be one which I got through one of my early leaders as well as mentor, who told me that, hey, you have to come out of water and swim in the ocean, and only then you can go further. The third thing, which is obviously something which I have got multiple times, is stay hungry, stay foolish. So the passion for learning is extremely important, and I'll tell you, different roles will put you into different challenges, and if you are able to keep your learning attitude through that journey, it helps you. And then the other two, I would say, have come more in the recent years. One is about building personal equity. People should know who you stand for. So in my case, it has mostly been, passion to grow people and my energy, which I have kind of kept in, because I see my work as worship, so I have been able to do that. But building your personal equity or a brand called you is something one of my mentors told me. And then I think the last important thing is also about, help others grow. And, if you take care of themselves, they will take care of the work. And I think those have been like my 4 or 5, I would say, key messages, or I would say advices I have been getting through my mentors, which kept me going.
I think it's interesting what you said. I mean, second point that you talked about, the second advice as well. And I see that, yes, it gets challenging when you start off in a relatively comfortable work environment. And we talk of being in Singapore, you would see that at times, it's fantastic place to live, fantastic place to work, pretty convenient, right? In that sense, it spoils you a bit. That stepping out and taking a challenging assignment in probably a third world country at times, because there might be a need to, for the company to put somebody there and for you to grow as well, because if you have to take up assignments in future where you have to lead a large region, you have to know how to manage, multiculturally and manage different businesses across the region. Sachin also talked about P&G being in the masters for Gartner. So, what do you think contributes to us being there as a company? And this is for the ninth year in a row.
No, that's a good question. And when P&G made it to the masters list for the first time, right, we obviously had a track record of driving constructive disruptions in space of supply chain. But the job of supply chain was still a backroom function. So the role was more to ship cases at the most efficient cost to serve, cash to serve, and possibly get the product in consumers' hands so that you can make your business fly. It was never seen as a strategic function, but at that point, P&G still had possibly one of the better integrated supply chains compared to the industry. But what I would say, Pulkit, is in the last 3 to 4 years through pandemic, I think our Gartner rating of being master for the last 4 years is truly well earned and justified, because we really need to reconfigure our supply chain, reboot the learning, and accelerate a lot of the capabilities we had built in before. And one of the things I said that P&G came stronger out of the pandemic is because we already had done some digitization automation work ahead of pandemic, which we just accelerated as some of these things came. And for a supply chain master, even the criteria from Gartner has been evolving. Now sustainability is a far more important thing. Use of AI, use of digital capabilities, a different level of workforce who can impact it, and of course looking at different KPIs of resilience and all, which were not that important few years back, right? Earlier supply chain was all about best productivity, best service, and possibly optimize cash.
Right.
But you are now seeing some new vectors on which Gartner expects the masters to perform. And I think P&G has been able to reinvent and reboot the supply chain. And I can tell you, we in fact came only stronger out of the pandemic, because some of the capabilities we had built in actually came in handy. And I would say, 2-3 important things which stand for me, which of course pivots are rating as a master. One is about doing remote qualifications of our technologies, where our engineers couldn't travel to the floor. We were able to have capabilities which can do remote vendor acceptance testing and all of that. And I think that definitely came pretty handy through this period. The second big area was leveraging data with your customers as well as suppliers, again where the physical connection or visits were not possible. And I think this ability to leverage data and ability to automate our physical flows also helped us in a better time of labor shortage, right? So I can tell you, in my last assignment, as you know, I was in North America. With the significant challenges of labor shortage, our labor resiliency was the pivot for our success, right? And because of our automated flows in our warehouses and in plants.
Mr. Sachin, labor resiliency meaning what, in what form?
Yeah, so it was about how can you still manage an operation which is resilient even through labor shortage, because if we had heavily manual operations, like a customization where it's people who are doing the transformations, versus for P&G in North America, we did have capability of doing this through machines, right, and through robots, and that helped us to still ship cases even through the pandemic, when some of our competition didn't have labor because of either the high level of I would say the physical distancing which was required, number of people out on quarantine, and obviously people who were themselves coping with the infections, right? So I think that, so the resiliency was about ability to run your operations uninterrupted, even when you had shortage of people, because you had capability of automated flow, which helped us ship cases.
Right. And I mean, if I look in the context of, call it, the developing markets, I think the balance of resiliency, or at sometimes let's call it business continuity planning, with driving productivity gets, I think, incrementally challenging, because anything that you invest on resiliency or business continuity is going to come at the cost of productivity. Labor is still, I would say, relatively cheap in many of the developing markets. So how do you see that journey? Because I think in the pandemic we have learned, right, that having business continuity is super important, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have it, then you don't have a business to
No,
run at times.
that's a
So,
great question, and the vectors of resiliency could be very different, So one area I can say is, of course, if you decide to create business continuity plans and have 2 or 3 sourcing sites for every product, it's not going to be affordable, right? So first is we need to clearly know what businesses we protect based on some of the segmentation of priorities and all of that, and you definitely need to look at it from lens of your suppliers and key materials, and also the feedstock of those materials,
right.
right? So that will be definitely one area I would say. So having a clear segmentation and tiering of what to protect and how do you protect it so that that particular location doesn't have the same vulnerability as the previous one. So having active BCPs which are validated based on business priority is, I think, the first important thing. So you don't create backups for everything, but you create contingency plans where they create value. The second important thing I would also say in terms of resiliency, which we need to look at, is how fast it would take to trigger a BCP for you. Because, for example, if it's expensive and if it also takes you 3 months to create that supply chain, it's not going to help you. So again, maybe in some areas, what P&G had to do is to keep some push button solutions where, if needed, you don't trigger it on day one, but if you have a particular criteria, like for example, the external cases in a community increase to a particular level, you may want to trigger that through a dates and gates approach. So clearly, keeping that activation and keeping the lead time perspective in is equally important. But ultimately, it's like you said, OTSR game, which is ensuring not sufficiency, but at a right cost to serve and right cash to serve. And
Right.
what is most important, Pulkit, is once you come out of the crisis, you need to recover your cost hurts. That is the more important thing. Otherwise, there is a challenge that
Correct.
it could remain in your structure and those BCPs could become your ongoing supply chain.
Right.
So I think making sure that there is a good process to manage that is important. But I think P&G has been managing that pretty well, and now we are going into a few vectors like formulation flexibility, because that would give us the ultimate flexibility and also BCP. I'll tell you one of the success why P&G was able to get products on shelf when our competition couldn't in North America is because, especially in a brand like Tide, we were able to reformulate almost on a real-time basis, and we had 6,000 reformulations done in a span of 3 months.
Wow.
So we were reformulating with materials whichever was available, and still not impacting the irresistible superiority of our products into consumers' hand. And this work we had done with digital capability and with partnership of supply chain with R&D provided us that ultimate flexibility without really getting into too much cost upcharge. Because I'll tell you, the real icing on cake was our reformulation and the materials which we actually did through the crisis, in some cases became our ongoing materials because they were cheaper
Wow.
and
Okay.
they provided even cost savings. So it was not necessarily a or, but it was a and. We delivered productivity and even the BCP and resiliency against the challenges.
That's great. That's great. I mean, of course, knock on wood. Hopefully, the pandemic is behind us and nothing significantly disruptive that happens externally, which is kind of beyond anticipation. But what would you say are, call it, one or two biggest disruptions that you expect in supply chain, or one or two biggest challenges even as we run the businesses today? What would you say are the biggest challenges that we face today, or what do we expect in, call it, any website in the next 3 years to come?
Yeah, so I wish I had a crystal ball. Like if we knew, a pandemic would hit us, possibly we all would have been bit different and better prepared for it. But jokes apart, I'll tell you that 2 or 3 challenges I see definitely coming around the corner. One is, of course, the regionalization of our supply footprint is becoming an increasing need because, with the way global international trade and, the ocean freight is shaping up, there is going to be some level of demand supply equation challenges in next few months till, the shipping industry comes fully back. And so the more regionalized or localized supply footprint you have, the better it is for your responsiveness, agility, as well as resiliency. So definitely, and this is not anymore stopping, Pulkit, only on our material suppliers, but we have to also look at our feedstock suppliers into materials, which are many times very important. And I think a simple story here is our reliance of feedstocks coming from China. Now with China's economy getting closed, and with the global evolving footprint with other developed countries with China,
Right.
we also are seeing challenges on, can we really have a formulation which is least dependent on feedstocks coming from China, and how do you create some of that localized feedstock base in the
Right.
country where you are, right?
Right.
So that's again becoming one very pertinent challenge, I would say. The second big one, if you ask me, is AI versus human. Again, with advent of automation, one of the big challenges companies like P&G will have to see is, do we become a real AI first company and approach it with mindset of AI being pivotal to a business strategy, or use it only as a afterthought,
Right.
and just automate flows or digitize flows.
Right.
So that's going to be one of the big things which we need to look at. And then the third thing which comes with it is the skills of people whom we hire. Because unless we significantly upskill our workforce, some of the digital capabilities which would be needed for some of the AI enabled systems in future will need capabilities of skill set very different than today. And that's where more people with data science qualifications, people with analytic jobs will possibly be some of the hiring pools for P&G. So I think those will be, so one is about organization, second is clearly about material resiliency with evolving footprint. There is war in Europe, so some of our challenges was, if you are securing materials out of Europe, we need to at least get them out into other parts of the world. So I think the economy is changing, the markets are evolving, and so I would say regionalization of feedstock supply, getting out of dependence on some of the traditional citadels of supply. Like China and India have been that for most of the industries. And then looking at the workforce, and then looking at what's the role of AI versus human in your business strategy.
Right.
I would say those would be the
No,
top
I think
three.
that's very insightful. Then the one that you mentioned on sourcing, I think that certainly, I know that's a very active action plan that we have, at least in P&G. I'm sure other companies are also thinking about it. I think it's also becomes important for managing the feedstock to be regionalized, because when we source as P&G, given all the work processes that have evolved over decades, there is strong control on those. So at least what you are sourcing, you have got good amount of control. But when it comes to the next level, you are completely blind. And you need to kind of rely on what you are hearing, and you don't have any data. There's no very limited ERP integration that happens with the suppliers. So I think that makes a lot of sense. From an AI standpoint, again, I know it's early days still, but I think I love the way you framed it. Is it AI first, or is it AI enabled and it's like an afterthought? So, I mean, are we doing something already in that area that you are okay to share?
That's a great question, Pulkit. See, at a change has to start at the top, and I'm proud to say that P&G has been, getting some of its top management go through some of the key programs. Just last year, I personally completed the Harvard's program on competing in age of AI. And I can tell you, it was great to kind of go back, though virtually, to Harvard classroom, almost 26 years after, I had left my business school. But it was so good to talk to some of the other minds in the industry and, really learn. So I think the first is we are educating at a strategy level, what AI first company would look like. And I'll tell you, one of the case studies we learned there was how Moderna managed its vaccine drives through the pandemic. One of the reasons they had a significant head start over a lot of others, because they performed as an AI first company, versus some of their competition really didn't have AI at core of their business strategy, whether it was distribution strategy or whether it was just formulating. And when I say AI could be afterthought, in P&G also, as you rightly said, it's early days. We have some of our processes automated, right, with robotic process automation, machine learning. But what we have not really formulated is a strategy around AI. Is digital in your DNA? Are you
Right.
looking at AI, not just from a process flow, but truly end to end?
Hmm.
And I think there is more work which is going to evolve in this space. But I would say that P&G would not want to lose the first mover advantage in this
Hmm.
space, starting with top. The other big area we are doing is we definitely are having a lot of pilots, in different markets where AI can truly create value. And we are also bringing a part of workforce which will be more digitally savvy, with people coming with experiences of data science.
Right.
So at least a cross section of people. I was in Japan last week, and I was able to talk to two PhDs, who are data scientists, and the skill profile was so different. And I was getting goosebumps just knowing their mastery, how they were talking about data architecture, how they were thinking of converting that data into a standard from where we can pull on and run different
Hmm.
applications which are today done by human beings. It is fascinating to see, and I think it's important for each one of us to keep ourselves upskill. Other thing we are also doing in PNG is doing a kind of digital IQ testing
Hmm.
of some of our leadership, and making sure that we are intentional in
Hmm.
growing their skills beyond just like the digital citizen development program.
Right.
There are programs like reverse mentorship with the young like the bandwans who come from the fresh universities, and who are with a much higher digital IQ than some of us who have been born in a non AI world in a way.
Correct.
I
Correct.
think that's where PNG has to change and be the first mover, which is how do you use these younger brains to also educate the top leadership through something called as a reverse mentorship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I see that in personal healthcare as well, that, and the best thing you can do is basically get out of the way and
Yes,
let people really, give the
absolutely.
challenge and let people innovate,
Yes,
let them spend time on the challenges which are there, real life
yes,
challenges on business, but the amount of technology driven innovation that they can come out with to solve problems in record time and automate as well, right? I think it's really fantastic. And
yes,
yeah, you are right. I mean, if we go top down, probably it will not be as efficient or
yes.
effective. Great. So you Sachin, you also talked about equity, and I think that's pretty unique. I don't hear that from many leaders. I think there are a few, of course, senior leaders where from them you hear about equity. But what's the role of equity? And of course, in your case, certainly, like you said, you work towards maintaining, of course, creating the equity that you have and maintaining it as well consciously. But do you think is it needed more for senior leadership, or everybody needs to kind of build their
Yeah,
equity and essentially stand for something, right? That's how
yeah.
you're. If somebody has to recall somebody, it's top things that come to your mind is
Yeah.
what I think equity will
If you had
stand for.
asked
So
me this question, Pulkit, 15 years back, I would say, yeah, personal equity is a top management thing. Only when spend like 20 years in the company, that's when, you need to know. I'll tell you, this is so wrong. Even as you join, or even in universities, right, you obviously are known for some things, right? And it's a brand called you.
right,
And in PNG we talk about performance, image, and exposure, right? And we say performance is in your hand. What's your image and what's the exposure are possibly the other two drivers of your success, which is the PIE model we call. But I'll tell you, the important part here is at every level equity is important, because a lot of times your reputation reaches the
mm,
boardroom before you actually enter. I can tell you,
mm,
when I was announced in February and I came here in May, there were many people who already had started talking to my direct reports in North America, saying, okay, what is top on Sachin's mind? What are the first two or three things he would like to do? Now, I had the advantage of being a homegrown talent, but there were
yes,
still a lot of people who had been hired in the last few years who hadn't
right,
seen me. And I think one of the big things was, okay, what is he all about, and
right,
that's basically your brand. So like obviously, if your brand is okay, this guy is always with a grumpy face, and he obviously is never happy with status quo. He is very ruthless with people. He leads with only head, has zero heart. Then
right,
obviously that's your equity. And whether you like it or not, whether you want to be intentional about it,
right.
that reputation and that word has already gone even before you have entered the room.
Mm,
So I would say at every level, having that equity is
mm,
important. Now, as you impact more and more people, I'm very fortunate in this role. As we were talking, I have 105 countries. We have 10,220 people of product supply in Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa. And with that type of organization, you definitely cannot reach everyone directly, and it's where your equity reaches you
Right.
and reaches to them. And I think that's what I would say. So like I was sharing with you, in my case, when I made it to band 5, we went through a very professional personal equity development program, and that's where the equity you read in my profile, which is being
Right.
a passionate business leader who is very keen to develop the future leaders of product supply, and who is someone with a business leadership with supply chain acumen versus the vice versa, right? And I think that has been shaped over a period of time, but it comes out of 360-degree interviews. So they talk to your direct reports, they talk to your peers, they talk to your leadership, and from there they shape that equity statement. But I will say that equity is needed. You are born with some equity. As you work in community, you shape that equity as you talk to your friends, and then as you go through your journey, because you have a much higher impact because of your role to a lot of people, it's
Right.
important for you to assess and
Yeah.
understand what your equity is. So
Right.
if there are some blind spots, you can correct them. Because like I'll tell you, one of the equity statements which was a surprise for me was risk averse. And
Yeah, I also
if
noticed that.
people
Yes.
talk to me, they would never say that Sachin is risk averse. But then when I started deeply thinking, I actually understood that I sometimes avoid things where I'm not comfortable. And I think that's possibly the bit rooted to this fear of failure, which
Right.
all of us have to some extent. But
Right.
I sometimes don't touch tasks where I
Yeah.
possibly don't see a good chance of success,
Right.
and that comes from that risk
Right.
aversion. So,
Right.
and as you go into bigger jobs, maybe there are a lot of other things where I would jump in and take that risk, of course with its
Yeah.
implications well understood. But in some cases, that was deep in my heart. So sometimes it's also a learning journey.
Yeah. And how do you, I mean, on the last point, Sachin, just to pick on that, on the
Yeah.
point of being risk averse, how should one think about it? Because in a big company like P&G and many other companies which are, I would say, well established and
Yeah.
processes are set, people get hired, the role responsibilities are pretty well defined. How good an individual is basically evaluated on the basis of not making mistakes,
Yeah.
right? And versus if I hear about a lot of people who have done startups, and they talk about all day, they can talk about saying how do you make mistakes and make a
Yes.
lot of mistakes
Yes.
and learn and course correct fast. So it's the
Yes.
agility, and of course they have to grow,
Yes.
10x 100x growth is what is most
Yes.
essential. So how to think about making mistakes
Yeah.
in a
No,
company,
that's a great point. And I'll tell you, I have been fortunate in my 26 years now, coming to that, Pulkit. I have had experiences of running very small businesses where I had much higher flexibility to take risks, make
right.
mistakes, because the implication of that mistake to company was much more contained. Whereas when in my last role, when I ran North America Fabric Care, it's a 10 billion supply chain. It's 12% of P&G's revenue and close to 20% of company's profit. And you can't do pilots there. So I think one thing as a company we need to look at is how do we learn small, but when we have a success, we can scale fast. And I think there is a big a program in company where we called, it's like the active prototyping, right? So you basically, have a small pilot where the cost of failure could be high, but it is still contained compared to some of the bigger businesses, and it is something where we get learnings which we can then scale up as you develop the final solution. So I would sincerely say that the growth mindset, which is yet thinking, right? So instead of saying I can't do it, I can't do it yet, is the culture which the leaders need to create, so that our organizations are encouraged to try things which are also out of their comfort zone in a way, right? The constructive disruption we were talking, but at the
Right.
same time make the implications of those risks clear enough and take those risks via pilot approach in places where you could be contained, and then based on those learnings you could take bigger risks. And I think it has to be a leadership culture, and you are absolutely right. How can P&G, which has close to 70,000 people in its supply chain globally, still can be lean like a startup? And one of the things I have personally learned is, how do you think like a startup? from the agility standpoint, and even if you are an elephant like P&G, how do you still demonstrate those aspects of agility and growth mindset, and continue to create this learning culture where people are even rewarded for taking risks and potentially failing, because every failure brings a new learning.
I think that's very insightful, Sachin. And I think another thing that you talked, maybe not talked, but I remember seeing in the wonderful equity pyramid that you shared, that you had put together, was on the aspect of being always on, always connected. And I mean, not just something that's written there, but I think I've also personally experienced over many years that I've been in P&G. I think I've always given you a call and requested for your guidance on anything that was crucial, and you have been super generous in giving your time. How do you? I mean, I'm literally, this is something I want to know. How do you manage your time, Sachin? Because in North America, fabric care, of course, like you said, $10 billion business, and then over here, again, another ball game with such a large region. How do you manage your time? How do you go about managing all the stuff within 24 hours a day?
Yeah, I think, see, one is power of active delegation. I'll tell you, I normally define where I can personally add value, and where I can have others deliver the best for me. And so one thing is to get surrounded by right level of senior leadership around you, who can, with little coaching, do their work and possibly do it better than you do. So like you said, go off their way, give them space to deliver breakthrough. Just be in touch to understand, if they need, they can come back to you, versus you poking nose in what they're doing. So I think definitely that has been one of the key things for me. The second thing is, I to some extent practice the corporate athlete philosophy, through the challenging day, where, typically taking frequent breaks after every 90 minutes. I was telling you other day jokingly, but it's so important. I, travel between our two offices in Singapore, right, which are about 15 minutes or 10 minutes of walk. That kind of forces me those steps,
Right.
to get me ready for possibly the next meeting. It helps me organize thoughts. It helps me possibly, like the sight of green, which gets me. So I think that is important. And then for me, the weekends are also the time to reboot myself. Now, in my job, I have to travel a lot. And the flights are where, I kind of, use that as my thinking time. I would normally not be connected on a Wi-Fi and doing emails, but that's where, I will either think of the people I'm going to meet, what are the message tracks, I would like to have with them. And also I think it's about using the peaks and the troughs wisely, ensuring that you take those frequent breaks to reboot yourself, refresh yourself. I was telling you, one of the good refreshers for me is playing badminton with my daughter over the weekend, right? And I think that's kind of a ritual we have been doing for some years, which
Right.
helps me, get myself back for the next week ahead. So, and then the power of delegation, which is clearly to trust people around you, give them space, but be there for them. So that possibly helps me, create capacity for, responding to, the emails or things which come to me. So that I believe that if someone is approaching me, that's where I can make an impact in their life, versus getting into someone else's work, where anyway you are not the best person to do it.
Switching gears, Sachin, getting into a different area. I know you're very passionate about this. It's the topic of equality and inclusion.
Yeah.
I, of course, as somebody who was inside P&G, I do see the company making strides on this over the past few years. Of
Yeah.
course, it has been one of the companies which values this quite a lot, and we are kind of aggressively pushing ahead on this journey. What is your personal take on this? I know you talk of this thing called I'm black, I am white, I'm Asian. So can you talk a bit more on that, and
Okay.
how do you approach
Yeah.
this?
So see, one thing which I can tell you, Pulkit, is E&I for me is a movement and not a moment, right? And I have personally got so much of learning in this space over the years, right? I think many of you know that, I grew up in India. India is obviously land of diversity with multiple languages, multiple religions. So we never thought of, the whole concept of whether any diverse teams is a problem, right? But when I went to like possibly Australia or in US in the recent past, I realized that some of that is that the disparity of different vectors of diversity are so much up in your face, and that actually changes your thinking. So personally for me, being in Australia, where we would say primarily people will be Aussie, right? But I was amazed to see I had 11 nationalities reporting into me in a small team of 30 people when I was based in Sydney. So the point I'm making is equality has different vectors. It's not just gender. It's not just people with disabilities or different abilities. It's not just LGBTQ, or it would not be just the Asia Pacific Americans or the Hispanics or the African ancestry. So it's not just the color. So I think what I always believe in this space is you should be like a panda, which for me is multicultural, right? And that's where this philosophy comes, that panda is black, it has white, and it comes from Asia, which is China. And that should be your mantra, which is to be multicultural. Because two things I will say here, Pulkit. One is P&G has such diverse consumers, because we serve about 6 billion people across the world, and they are diverse. Our employee base needs to mirror that diversity, and we need to create inclusive culture in that diverse picture. Because if you cannot mirror the external diversity of your consumers, you will not be able to create winning solutions with them. And that's why creating an inclusive culture in a diverse community and a diverse employee base is what we need to bring. So that would be one important thing. So that's why I always say diverse teams produce better results via inclusive culture.
Right.
And then the second big thing for me in my personal job, as you know, we have 105 countries in Asia Pacific, Middle East, Africa. We have close to 4 time zones, and the farthest east to farthest west is a 7-hour time zone difference, right? And we have multiple languages, multiple food habits. And how do you create a winning organization which truly makes 1 plus 1 equal to 3? I think that's why thinking like a panda, being multicultural, is so important. One of the other things I think you would have read about, which also was shaped in my stint in US, is about this 4V model, being an active ally. Because we talk about allyship and sponsorship, right? So a lot of times, you see a very different workforce around you, and important thing is, how can you be an active sponsor or ally of that team? And I use this 4V model. It's about the first V is about being versed. So you need to have the knowledge about what's happening. So when I went into US, I was completely having zero knowledge about the AA affinity group, the African ancestry, and there were a lot of riots happening in the industry, and I had to really understand that. So being versed is first important thing, then being vigilant, right? And we were chatting about this. When you have such a diverse people, even when we do one-on-one, it's important for us to understand what are those unspoken, undiscussable things, even in a one-on-one, right?
Correct.
Just through the body language. So the vigilance is the second important thing. So being versed, being vigilant. And then the other two things are about how strong of a voice you are. So being visible and being vocal. So if you have a good sensitivity and understanding of the issue because of the literature survey or reading of books, watching of films you have done in the topic of racial inequality or whatever, and then if you have really been vigilant about what's happening around you, both spoken and unspoken, and then using those two V's, if you can be more vocal and visible in this space, that's where a leader can create a difference.
The other area is really on, from a diversity standpoint,
Yes.
on supply chain is probably one of the streams where from a gender diversity standpoint,
Yes.
female colleagues would not probably want to pick on, or
Yes.
students would not want to probably
Yes.
pick on as their lead choice.
Yes.
Is there something you think we need to do differently, or are we already doing something differently on this? I know we are making progress in terms of the manufacturing sector is one.
Yes.
I think there are various plans which are coming out with initiatives where it makes it more friendly for
Yes.
the women employees to be able to work and contribute.
Yeah.
Are there other
Yeah.
things that you
No,
think?
it's a great question. And, at a leadership level, the first thing is we need to hire at more than 50-50. Right, because if you hire at anything less than 50, you are never able to make it 50 later. So in fact, in some of our countries where female hiring has been a challenge, we are actually looking at campuses where we have higher female percentage. And there are some great case studies like in India. In many cities now we have been able to even hire at a 60-40, so 60% female, so that through the life cycle. So one is about hiring and then is about retention. And like you said, we actually track a percentage of women at band 3, band 4, band 5, and we normally see that normally at entry level it could be a 60-40. It eventually becomes a 40-60 at a band 4.
Right.
And that's because obviously some women drop off the workforce because of the changes on their personal life, and they get married, they have kids, and that's why the amount of jobs and type of jobs we give have to be conducive enough on that. So like flexibility from work from home, which has come in pandemic, that is actually able to help us retain women much better. And I was talking about the whole AI and data and automation and digitization changing the workforce.
Right.
And so in those type of jobs, a lot of our manufacturing jobs aren't now that heavy on manual labor. And that's why we actually need people with skills, with digital analytic capabilities, which are possibly for us completely gender neutral, right, in that sense. So I think we will be able to attract more women in workforce, retain them and grow them, not just in manufacturing but even in other things. There's obviously some geographies where we have more challenges than the other. I think one of the things we should do even a better job, Pulkit, in Asia is to really have some awards and rewards for women in manufacturing as well as in broader supply chain. One of the things North America has done really well is they have Women Make America or Step Ahead Awards, which are basically to recognize lifetime contributions by women. So they have two categories, emerging leader and an honorary category. So honorary is someone who has spent 20 plus years as a woman leader in manufacturing, who has made that industry impact, and they choose 100 people every year across industries and really reward them, and their inspiring stories are published for others to learn from. And similarly, honorees, the emerging leaders are people who are less than 30 years, which means they have less than 10 years of active experience, but how they are bringing their I would say new learning from university into the overall learning. So clearly I think we need to do more of that. Even in North America they have started non-manufacturing women in supply chain type of awards now, where again you are recognizing people and making sure that their stories travel, so that we can make best of it. And I have seen some very good examples, like Middle East Africa is possibly a place where we didn't have those many women in workforce. But when I was in Dubai hub few months back, I was amazed at some of the programs they have created to not just make P&G an inspiring place for women, but a place where they can grow disproportionately to their aspirations. So I think it's changing, but I wish the change was faster.
True. I think linked to this, of course, growing the organization with the objective of E&I included and growing the business. I know P&G has got a very good vision now in place, which we call as Supply Chain 3.0.
Yeah.
Can you share the top lines of it? The different vectors of Supply Chain 3.0. What does it have, and how do we see us progressing as a company on that vision?
So Supply 3.0 is not a completely new concept, right? We were talking about P&G being a Gartner master for 9 consecutive years. A lot of those ingredients have been there, but what happened was through pandemic we built some new muscles which now we need to systematize and make them I would say the future muscles to win in future, right? And I think the 4 big areas which came out of that for us, first is supplying in full, right, which is all about resiliency. As I talked, through pandemic we were able to supply products and get onto shelf when our competition couldn't. So we are definitely looking at what are all those vectors of supply in full which we would like to look at. So that still becomes one important foundational capability of Supply 3.0. The second big capability we talk is about the workforce of future, right, or the superior workforce which is ready to deliver some of the transformations which are going to happen. Right, we talked about one of the potential challenges being AI first versus AI as a afterthought, right? That
Right.
type of thing. So clearly, this availability of people is going to be a challenge with the right skill set. And because P&G is a grow from within company, how are we thinking about bringing people with some of those skills is important. So the whole second pillar of Supply 3.0 is about that superior workforce. The third important aspect, of course, is about sustainability, and I think you would know this. Our customers are becoming more demanding, our employees are becoming more demanding, our consumers are becoming more demanding in that space, right? It's not just about using natural ingredients, it's not just about nail plastic, but it's all about how our supply chains are impacting our carbon footprint, and do we have a plan for let's say your greenhouse gas emissions to be zero by let's say 2040, right? So there are some aspects of our supply chain. Then there are some aspects of how do you impact the consumer habits, and how does P&G product supply bring products to enable that. So a simple thing is Tide cold water washing. So how can we bring a product which can give the same washing performance of detergent
Right.
on cold temperature versus really dialing up the temperatures, right? And that electricity is a big consumption of not being sustainable and energy thing. And then third thing is how do we partner with R&D to create solutions which will reduce the space of recycle and all completely. So polypropylene and polyethylene are the two big places where we have recycle challenge. So we are trying to create industry solutions partnering with R&D and supply chain which will help us get out of that recycle much better versus there. So that's how P&G is kind of. So sustainability becomes the third vector into that space. And then the fourth one is seamless data and touchless flow, which is all about how do we accelerate digitization, automation of physical flows, information flows, and the cash flows in the company. So those are the four vectors we have defined globally, which we call Supply 3.0. But it's basically all about what's needed to win as we move from Industry 4.0 to Industry 5.0, and what are the learnings from pandemic which we need to now systematize to win in future.
Sachin, switching gears as well a bit, right? So a bit of fun section, quick rapid fire. Uh, Let me throw a few questions, right? Early bird or night owl?
Very much early bird, that has been my mantra right through my academics, and I still wake up possibly before the first bird starts singing. So
Yeah,
it's
and I
normally
don't know
around
what time
5
you sleep
a.m.
because I remember when you were in US, I think a couple of times I exchanged messages with you coming at 3 a.m. your time. So
Yeah.
I don't even know how early is early. So
I think normally I wake up at 5, but for
okay,
that time, I was almost keeping myself on Europe time zone.
right,
Given that I had to attend some of the calls in Asia, and
right.
I used to kind of close my day at 6 p.m. I have my dinner. I switch off myself at like 7:30 so that I can still complete my 6 hours of sleep. But
Yeah,
I'm very
much
much a
needed.
morning person. Yes.
Much needed. Okay. One book you suggest everyone reads.
I would give you two, because
Okay.
those two have impacted me the most. The one is The Goal by Ilya Goldratt. I think every supply chain professional should read that, because that tells you how, these organizations continue to drive process improvements. And for a supply chain professional, it's a must read, I would say, The Goal. The second one, which I think, is a great inspiration for me, is Confidence by Rosabeth Moss-Cantor. And she talks about, how do you, build confidence to become a leader you want to. And it's on a soft skill, it's nothing to do with supply chain. But I'll tell you, from my beginning of coming from a smaller town in India and then becoming someone, hopefully making an impact in supply chain, I had to personally go through some of the tips coming out of that book on building the confidence. And now I have created a small training program which I use with some of the younger leaders on that. But
Interesting.
those will be the top two I would recommend.
Interesting. Okay. And if you were to have dinner with somebody dead or alive, who would that person be?
Good question. Again, here I would say I have a Indian favorite and I have someone who has been my idol for a long time, right? And so that person is unfortunately now dead, is Lee Iacocca. So Lee Iacocca actually expired in July 2019. He is credited for bringing this, the Ford's car of Mustang. So he was a serial innovator in that sense, and he did his, first big part of career in Ford Motors. But what really inspires me about Lee Iacocca is how he transformed Chrysler as an organization, really demonstrating the 10 C's of leadership he calls. And I have, because I started my career in Tata Motors, Ford and Chrysler have always been the icons on how they brought what consumers needed at that time and how the revolution in automobile industry started globally. So Lee Iacocca is my one. And then again, because I started my career in Tata Motors, the one person I personally idolize and would love to have dinner with him, and thankfully he is still someone I can have one with, is Ratan Tata. Again, like I said, he is one. His values of bringing Tata Group to where it is, and how he has been able to still keep his philosophy of simple living, high thinking is incredible.
Right.
So those will be the two folks. I missed the opportunity with Lee Iacocca. Hopefully, with Ratan, I can be lucky someday.
Yes, you must do that. I think he's very approachable as well. Of course, if you reach him the right way. Okay, big role in a small company or a small role in a big company. What would you recommend?
A big role in a small company is definitely a better thing, I would say, from your learning standpoint, because you can drive multi-skilling. And I would say that's an opportunity to deeply understand business. And if you ever want to be on your own, as a business owner or entrepreneur, I think that experience is much, much better than doing a very small specialized skill in a big company. But what would be best is if you can eventually get to a big role in big company, of course.
In fact, the time that I joined, I remember, Sachin, of course, in your time it would have been even bigger. But even the time that I joined P&G, I think we used to really pride ourselves at that time for the amount of span of control that you will get even as a new hire.
Yes.
I remember I joined, and I remember very vividly. It was 1st February 2007. I met you in a room in Mumbai.
Yes.
And you said, tomorrow we are going to Goa for 3 days.
Yes.
You get back 5th, you're flying to Chennai. And I've never been to Tamil Nadu in my life. And out of the blue, I really
I know
down.
you started that at the CTLM in South, right? Absolutely.
It was great. And I remember again very clearly, Rahul was leading,
the CTLM function, or the sales logistics function for India.
And after, I think, a couple of months, I called Rahul and I said, Rahul, I don't know. Rahul said, hey, you have been hired here to take care of this. Don't bother me. If you have a good question to ask, you call me again. I was like, okay.
And those were the fun days. Truly miss them. Absolutely.
So it was so much of early responsibility given. I keep telling my team that I was signing checks for so many hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yes.
I would really think that, oh my God, companies vesting so much of power in me. It really makes you feel
and like you said, because India was a much smaller company that time, right? It may be like by the time you came, it was 500 million. When I joined,
you were leading
it
the
was
country
100 million.
You were
100 million
at that time, and you were leading the...
Absolutely. But when I joined the company, it was 100 million, right? So automatically we were enjoying much bigger jobs at a junior level. Now I think, with the business in India getting to close to 2 billion, you are seeing jobs being more specialist as we go further. Yes.
Right. Any parting comments, Sachin? I think you've taken a lot of your time.
Two things I will always say. One is follow your heart, right? You need to be authentic. You need to be in a profession you love. There is no one path to success. So following your heart and being authentic about it is most important. Second thing I will leave you with is, I always say that, and this is something which my grandfather instilled in me when I was very young, is there is always room at the top. But, after spending 26 years in corporate career, one thing I would add is the higher you go, the closer you are to the exit. So always never rest on your past laurels, but always try to be on routine excellence, daily excellence, because you are only as good as that morning. Your past glory will not take you further. So like we always say, right, what you get you here would not take you there.
Right.
But still you need to have this healthy dissatisfaction with status quo. And that's what I would say, keep learning, stay hungry, stay foolish, and I would say follow the heart.
Great. Thanks a lot, Sachin. I
You.
think it's always a pleasure to talk to you. The amount of, I think every conversation, every discussion with you leaves one energetic and inspired. So big thanks for the time, and yeah, looking forward to connect sometime again.
Absolute pleasure, and I hope you get very successful with this adventure on top of your day adventure at P&G, and
Yes.
all the best. Thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed my conversations and deep dialogues, and hopefully our audience gets benefited with that as well. Thank you.